Pray with me. Lord, now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, you who are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. We've been walking around in this Moses story for the last 4 weeks. We've talked about a technique for stepping into different kinds of roles in a given story, testing out what it feels like to be moving with or against God's actions in a given scene. Acting within God's story is a way to help make better sense of how we walk around in our own stories as people of God. We've asked questions of our own encounters with the divine and that feeling of being woefully unprepared for what God is asking, yet knowing deeply that that thing is exactly what we need to be doing. And last week, we reflected on the persistence of violence, both in the Bible and in our lives, and wondered together about the choices we make and who we allow to bear the brunt of that violence. Today is our last week in this story. It is perhaps one of the most memorable scenes in the entire epic, whether because of Charlton Heston in Cecil B. DeMille's 1956 The Ten Commandments, or DreamWorks' 1998 animated film The Prince of Egypt. The image of Moses lifting his staff and God driving back the waters so that the Israelites could cross on dry ground is indelibly imprinted on our minds and in our hearts. For such a pivotal story, it was interesting to discover that the ancient rabbis didn't like the Torah's version of events all that much. Rabbi Adam Greenwald, director of the Miller Introduction to Judaism program at American Jewish University, commented that the rabbis found it to be a spectacular miracle, but something totally passive, accomplished through Moses' hands and God's grace, but missing the element of human agency. So in their boldness, the rabbis told a new story, which is captured and shared in both the Midrash and Talmud. In that story, the Israelites gathered at the water's edge, and Moses lifted his hands as God had commanded, and nothing happened. The sea remained still. Now you can imagine the panic of the people at that moment. Moses had never failed to produce a miracle before. Murmuring raced through the crowds. Many considered turning back and allowing themselves to be enslaved once more. And then out of the crowd walked a solitary figure. Nachshon, the son of Amminadab, stepped into the water. His family and friends looked on with horror and amazement. They cried, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" And Nachshon walked forward like a man possessed, up to his knees, his waist, his chest. The second the water came up just over his nostrils, the second when he was fully submerged, at that moment, and not a second before, the sea split, and the people were able to walk behind Nachshon to liberation, to a place of singing and joy. Liberation is not for the faint of heart. It is not for the casual observers, those who might see the opportunity for change, but prefer the comfort of the status quo, letting real change be someone else's work. Liberation is risky. Liberation requires getting wet. Liberation asks that those with plenty share with those who have less. Liberation sees my abundance tied to someone else's scarcity. Liberation knows that Martin Luther King Jr.'s words that no one is free until we all are free are true. That systems of oppression ensnare everyone, both those with power as well as those without. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." The path of freedom requires a willingness to risk everything. Yes, everything. The problem is that when we are comfortable, we have very little incentive to take risk. Why do the work of being made new when I kind of like being who I am already? And like last week, we don't often stop to count the cost of the violence to the other side, as long as we have what we want. We almost never are asked to care about the Egyptians who died in this story, or give a moment to consider their families, the ones who have suffered such a devastating loss. But this is liturgy and ancient origin stories, and not really history as we think of history today. There's no evidence that a devastating event like this ever took place. No mass escape of slaves from Egypt, no spectacular slaughter of the Egyptian army. Does this make the Bible untrue or unreliable? As Marcus Borges famously said, everything in the Bible is true, and some of it actually happened. This is a creation story. Like in Genesis 1, God acts to divide the waters. Dry land emerges, and the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob cross from chaos to life. God's people transition from family to nation. And this same motif will recur at the end of the 40 years of wandering, after Moses has died and Joshua leads the people across the Jordan River from wilderness to promised land. So how do we get to that level of trust? How do we get to a place where we can willingly walk into the water, propelled by the belief that life could be better for us, for our children, on the other side? Let's go back to Nachshon. Nachshon didn't necessarily plan to be the first one in the water. In fact, there's this lovely children's book that names Nachshon's one flaw as that he is afraid to swim. Nachshon's faith, like ours, doesn't appear out of nowhere. Faith grows when our assumptions of what we believe to be true or believe to be possible are examined, questioned, tested. Nachshon watched how God had been present with Moses, approaching Pharaoh, pleading with Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. Nachshon saw God in Moses' persistence, in his going back time and again to Pharaoh with the same impossible demands. Nachshon saw the plagues descend upon his community, and he experienced God's protection during the Passover. By the time Nachshon gets to the water's edge, he knows that a new future was possible, and that God and Moses would create a path. His trust allowed him to take that first step and to keep on walking even as the waters rose. Another commentary put it this way: One fellow named Nakshan jumped into the sea and caused the great miracle of the splitting of the sea. Technically, he was under no obligation to do so, but he knew that God wanted Israel to move onward toward Sinai. So he did what he needed to do. There was a sea in his way, so he jumped into the sea and plowed on toward his goal. The lesson for all of us is that we must stay focused on our life's mission, disregarding all the obstacles. How strong is our faith in this moment? What obstacles stand in our way? Where have we seen God at work in those we know and trust? In the church, in our community, our nation, our world. Where is God leading you? What do you see that needs to be done? Wade in so that others may follow. Amen. We have just a few announcements today. One, a reminder that at 11 o'clock you have two opportunities to continue with us in fellowship. One, Java and Jesus, discussing the second article in a series, and virtual coffee hour. Both of those Zoom links are in your worship email. Next weekend is a special racial justice themed weekend beginning Friday night, September 18th at 7 o'clock. The Racial Justice Movie Group invites everyone to a discussion of the movie Selma, and information on that is in your announcements and worship email. And then Sunday, we have a special racial justice themed worship service brought to you by our Racial Justice Mission Team. And following that at 11 o'clock will be a special Java and Jesus, where Vance Ashby, a member of ORUCC, will lead us in an exercise understanding privilege across lots of different areas of our life. So we invite you to that next weekend. A reminder, too, that our September Compassion Offering supports the back-to-school efforts for our neighborhood schools, Toki Middle School and Falk and Orchard Ridge Elementary Schools. A video on that can be found in the worship email or on our Facebook page. And now let us join Tammy Martins as we say a fond farewell